The lockdown has brought major changes in our understanding of what worship is. As the government law has restricted mass gatherings, we started online portals such as YouTube, Facebook, Zoom, and we are kind of getting used to this way of worshiping God. While most of us are accepting our pastors preaching online and our worship team singing collaboratively from different places, there is a hard debate going on whether we should continue our sacramental practices, that is the Lord's table and the baptism, through online. In this short video, I am going to address only about the Lord's table, and even while addressing about that, instead of giving a straightforward answer, we'll be trying to understand what Jesus meant when he said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life." This is one of the important verses used in the churches while practicing the Lord's table. If somebody is reading it for the first time, their immediate impression would be, seriously, is Jesus promoting cannibalism? Roman Catholic would say that the priest has the power to transubstantiate bread and wine into literal flesh and blood of Jesus, which may appear like cannibalism, but they would take you to explain the Aristotelian substance theory, which is not our interest here. On the other side, the evangelicals eat bread and wine not as the literal flesh and blood, but as the remembrance of the suffering of Jesus as well as our part in the suffering. And we do it often because it is an instruction that we directly received from Jesus and also Paul. But what we are trying to understand here is not about whether we should do it or not, or it should be done only in the church context, or can we practice it through online. My interest here is to explain the context of John 6:53 and to see how it is contributing to our understanding of the Lord's Supper. First of all, we can see that the context of the passage itself suggests that the text is not easy to interpret. You may ask, how is that? We read the author of the Gospel of John is giving an idea that even those who heard the phrase for the first time were not able to comprehend the expression, eating the flesh and blood. In John 6:52, the Jews were arguing, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" And again in verse 60 they say, "This is a difficult statement. Who can listen to it?" The problem for Jews here is not about whether Jesus is teaching cannibalism or not, of which we can also be assured. Then, if it is not about cannibalism, how has it to be taken? Unlike those who have heard it for the first time, we who are living in the 21st century has the advantage of seeing the larger picture of John's Gospel and the purpose statement of Gospel, which we can see in John chapter 20 verse 31. These have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So if the purpose of John is to drive his audience to believe in Jesus, how that is reflected in our passage, that is in John chapter 6 verse 53. In the context of chapter 6, we find Jesus is teaching in the synagogue right after the miracle of feeding the 5,000. Jesus was teaching to the audience who were trying to make him the leader just because they enjoyed the food. The audience identifies Jesus as the giver of the sustenance. Jesus, taking the opportunity, relates their present experience with that of their forefathers. He agrees to the fact that he is the miraculous provider, just as the Israelites in the wilderness received manna miraculously from heaven. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on further to say, "I am the bread of life. I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever." Manna gave temporal life to live on the earth, but the life that Jesus can give is eternal and spiritual. Here we can clearly see that Jesus is comparing himself directly with the manna in terms of its life-giving property. Coming back to our original question, what does it mean to eat and drink Jesus? The answer that we found is believing. It is very clear from the context that eating the flesh and drinking the blood of Jesus is nothing but having an absolute faith in Jesus. By eating and drinking, or in other words, by believing, we get united with the life and work of Jesus. So it is more than eating bread or wine or the traditional sacrament of the Lord's Supper, which we often practice without any real meaning. I think this is what Jesus and Paul too might have meant when they talked about the Lord's Supper. By partaking the Lord's Supper, we should be thinking about our level of trust in the salvific work of Jesus. By saying this, I am not nullifying the blessing of practicing the Holy Communion in the church context. But when we are not in the situation to do that way, I think we should continue to exercise our faith in Jesus. That is, continuing to practice the Lord's Supper in our homes.